Hello everyone, welcome back. Today our video is set in North America, which infamously is known for many things. One of which is the dehumanization and cruel treatment of citizens. Today we'll be focusing in on 3 of the most evil laws that have been in effect. Number 1. Compulsory sterilization. These laws, also known as eugenic sterilization laws, were enacted in several U.S. states during the early to mid-20th century. The fundamental idea behind these laws was rooted in the eugenics movement, a social and scientific movement advocating for the improvement of the human race through selective breeding and controlled reproduction. Supporters of eugenics believed that by preventing individuals deemed unfit from having children, they could improve the genetic quality of the population. The first sterilization law in the United States was passed in Indiana in 1907. By the 1930s, more than 30 states had enacted similar legislation. These laws typically targeted individuals with mental illnesses, developmental disabilities, and sometimes those with criminal backgrounds or deemed socially inadequate. The procedures were often performed on people residing in mental institutions, state hospitals, or other care facilities. One landmark case associated with these laws was Buck v. Bell, 1927, in which the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of a Virginia law allowing the forced sterilization of a woman named Carrie Buck, who was institutionalized and classified as feeble-minded. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes famously wrote in the majority opinion that 3 generations of imbeciles are enough, justifying the state's interest in preventing the perceived spread of mental disability. The legal framework for compulsory sterilization varied by state but generally involved a board or authority that determined whether an individual should undergo the procedure. The decision-making process often lacked proper safeguards and due process, and individuals subject to sterilization frequently had little or no opportunity to challenge the decision. The peak of compulsory sterilization occurred in the 1930s and early 1940s. Over 60,000 Americans are estimated to have been sterilized under these laws. The eugenics movement lost credibility after World War II due to its association with Nazi Germany's atrocities, and public opinion shifted against these practices. In the post-war era, attitudes towards compulsory sterilization changed, and many states began repealing these laws. The U.S. Supreme Court, in Skinner v. Oklahoma, 1942, ruled that procreation was a fundamental right, leading to increased scrutiny of sterilization laws. By the 1960s and 1970s, the majority of states had repealed or significantly restricted their compulsory sterilization laws. The practice is now widely condemned, and efforts have been made to address the historical injustices associated with these laws. Some states have taken steps to formally apologize and provide restitution to individuals who were forcibly sterilized. Number 2. The Ugly Law. The Ugly Laws, or unsightly beggar ordinances, were local laws enacted in various cities across the United States during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These ordinances were characterized by their discriminatory nature, targeting individuals with visible disabilities, especially those with physical deformities or disfigurements. The purpose of these laws was to prevent people with such appearances from being seen in public spaces, based on the assumption that their presence was offensive or disturbing to others. Cities like Chicago and San Francisco implemented versions of these ordinances. The laws reflected a societal attitude that marginalized and stigmatized individuals with disabilities, viewing them as undesirable or unsightly. The enforcement of these laws often led to the exclusion of people with disabilities from public life, restricting their movement and participation in community activities. The specific provisions of these laws varied by location, but they generally empowered authorities to arrest or fine individuals who were considered ugly or unsightly due to a perceived physical deformity. These ordinances were part of a broader pattern of discrimination against people with disabilities during that historical period. As societal attitudes evolved and awareness of disability rights increased, there was a shift away from such discriminatory practices. The latter half of the 20th century saw significant strides in the disability rights movement, culminating in the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, in 1990. The ADA prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities and promotes equal access to public spaces, employment, and services. Over time, the ugly laws were either repealed or became unenforceable, reflecting a more inclusive and rights-based approach to disability issues. The repeal of these laws was a crucial step towards recognizing the dignity and rights of people with disabilities and challenging the deeply ingrained prejudices that had led to their exclusion from public life. Number 3. Anti-miscegenation laws. Anti-miscegenation laws were a set of legal statutes in the United States that explicitly prohibited interracial marriages or relationships between individuals of different racial backgrounds. These laws were prevalent in many states from the late 17th century through the mid-20th century, enforcing racial segregation and reflecting deeply ingrained racial prejudices. The origins of anti-miscegenation laws can be traced back to colonial America. Early prohibitions often targeted marriages between white individuals and Native Americans or African Americans. Over time, these laws expanded to include various racial combinations, depending on the racial makeup of a specific state or jurisdiction. Many anti-miscegenation laws were grounded in a system of racial classification, with individuals categorized as white, black, Asian, Native American, etc. These classifications were used to determine the legality of marriages. The laws sought to maintain racial purity and prevent the blending of races, reflecting prevailing racist ideologies. Different variations of anti-miscegenation laws. For instance, Virginia's Racial Integrity Act of 1924 mandated racial purity by classifying individuals as either white or colored and making it illegal for whites to marry non-whites. Laws in southern states similarly prohibited marriages between whites and individuals classified as black, Asian, Native American, or other non-white racial categories. The constitutionality of anti-miscegenation laws was upheld in the 1883 Supreme Court case Pace v. Alabama. This decision confirmed that Alabama's anti-miscegenation statute did not violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. A pivotal moment in the history of anti-miscegenation laws came with the Supreme Court case Loving v. Virginia, 1967. Richard and Mildred Loving, an interracial couple, challenged Virginia's anti-miscegenation law, leading to a landmark decision by the Supreme Court. The court unanimously ruled that such laws were unconstitutional, declaring that the prohibition of interracial marriage violated both the Equal Protection Clause and the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. The striking down of anti-miscegenation laws marked a significant milestone in the civil rights movement and played a crucial role in dismantling legal barriers to interracial relationships. The legacy of these laws continues to be studied and discussed as part of the broader historical context of racial discrimination in the United States. The Loving v. Virginia decision affirmed the right to marry irrespective of race and contributed to the ongoing struggle against systemic racism. That does it for today's video. I hope you all have learned and realized some of the cruel things of the past. But we'll see you again soon. Have a good day.